Heaven was the sort of place that seemed to exist outside of time. A town cradled in lush valleys where the air was thick with the scent of blooming lilacs and the gentle hum of cicadas. I arrived on a windless afternoon, the roads winding like ribbons through the landscape, leading me to what was now my inheritance, a quaint two-story house that belonged to my Aunt Lydia. The townsfolk greeted me with curious smiles, each face a perfect mask of geniality. They referred to the town as Heaven, a name that seemed fitting under the azure sky and amidst the endless rows of golden wheat fields. As I stepped out of my car, I felt the weight of the world lift from my shoulders, replaced by an inexplicable ease. It was hard to imagine anything unpleasant could happen in a place like this. The house was a veritable postcard of charm, its porch adorned with rocking chairs that creaked in the breeze, windows framed with flower boxes bursting with vibrant colors. Inside, it smelled of lavender and old books. Each room was meticulously cared for, as if Aunt Lydia had stepped out just moments before, leaving behind a sense of her presence in every nook. I spent the first few days settling in, familiarizing myself not only with the house, but with the townsfolk as well. There was an easy camaraderie among them, a warmth that felt genuine, yet somehow overbearing. Men tipped their hats as they passed. Women offered fresh-baked pies with smiles that never faltered. I was welcomed into Heaven with open arms, yet there was something about their insistence on making me feel at home that struck a discordant note. The first disturbance came subtly, like a whisper at the edge of my thoughts. I was in the attic, rummaging through old trunks filled with relics of my aunt's past, faded photographs, letters bound by fraying ribbons, when I found a small, leather-bound journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, the ink smudged in places, yet readable. As I flipped through, I came across entries that grew increasingly disjointed, speaking of whispers in the night and shadows that lingered longer than they should. Aunt Lydia's handwriting became erratic, her words a tangle of fear and confusion. "Heaven is not what it seems," she wrote. "There is something beneath the surface, something dark." She mentioned the townsfolk, their eyes watching her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "They know I'm aware," the last entry read, the final words scrawled hastily as if in warning. I tried to dismiss the unease that settled over me, attributing it to the isolation and the remnants of an old woman's delusions. Yet the serenity of Heaven began to feel oppressive, the once gentle air now stifling. The townsfolk's smiles seemed stretched too wide, their eyes too bright, like actors in a play that had gone on far too long. As days turned into a week, the disturbances escalated. At night, I would hear footsteps echoing in the halls, soft and deliberate. I would find objects moved from their places, small things at first, a book, a vase. Then more unsettling occurrences. A window left open that I knew I had closed, the front door ajar despite having locked it. The townsfolk continued to maintain their facade of hospitality, yet there was an undercurrent in their interactions, a tension that mirrored my own growing paranoia. I felt their eyes follow me wherever I went, burning with a silent accusation. It was as if they were waiting, but for what? I couldn't discern. I decided to confront them, to uncover the truth of Aunt Lydia's suspicions. The town square was bustling when I arrived, the usual market day activity a distraction from the dread that clawed at my insides. I approached Mrs. Abernethy, a woman whose apple pies were as famous as her incessant gossip. "Is there something I should know about Heaven?" I asked directly, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Her smile faltered, eyes darting briefly to the others around us before she responded. "Heaven is a special place," she said, the sweetness in her voice cloying. "We take care of our own here. The phrase lingered in the air, heavy with implication. As I walked away, I felt their eyes upon me, the collective gaze of a town that held its secrets close. That night, the atmosphere shifted. A storm rolled in, the sky heavy with clouds that obscured the moon. I lay in bed, the journal clutched in my hands, Aunt Lydia's warning echoing in my mind. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows like an omen. A sudden noise pulled me from the edge of sleep. A creaking sound, like a door slowly opening. Heart pounding, I rose from the bed, every instinct screaming at me to stay put. But curiosity, or perhaps defiance, drove me forward. I followed the sound, each step echoing in the stillness of the house. The door to the basement was ajar, a sliver of darkness that beckoned. I hesitated, the rational part of my mind urging caution, yet something compelled me to continue. As I descended the stairs, the air grew colder, the darkness pressing in like a living thing. At the bottom, I found a room I hadn't known existed. It was small, walls lined with shelves upon which rested candles long melted into grotesque shapes. In the center stood a table, and on it, a map of the town, lines drawn like veins into the heart of heaven. I realized with a jolt of horror that the lines were paths, trails, leading into the woods behind the town. Paths that formed a peculiar pattern, one that seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. Among the things on the table was a photograph, yellowed with age, of the townsfolk gathered together. In their midst stood Aunt Lydia, her face a mask of terror. The realization hit me like a wave. The town's idyllic charm was a veneer, a carefully crafted illusion hiding something ancient and malevolent. Heaven was not a sanctuary. It was a trap, and its residents, willing participants in a ritual older than the town itself. As I turned to flee, the basement door slammed shut above me. Panic surged, my hands fumbling for a grip on the slick walls. Trapped, the reality of my situation crushed me under its weight. I was alone, against a force I couldn't comprehend, in a town that had claimed my aunt and now sought to claim me. In the basement's oppressive silence, I heard a whisper, faint yet unmistakable, a voice calling my name, a plea for understanding. It was Aunt Lydia, her spirit lingering, trying to guide me. Her journal, forgotten during my descent, lay abandoned on the floor above, its pages holding what I hoped was the key to my escape. The resolve firmed within me, and I stumbled back up the stairs, driven by a desperate need to uncover the truth and break the hold heaven had on me. I reached the top, my breath ragged, only to be met by the townsfolk standing in the foyer, their faces cloaked in shadow, eyes glinting with a knowledge I could never possess. "Welcome to heaven," they intoned as one, the words of finality that chilled me to the bone. I clutched the journal, Aunt Lydia's words a whisper in my mind. The town closed in around me, yet I felt her presence, a guiding light in the suffocating dark. I would fight, uncover the secret buried beneath the town's facade, and find a way to break free. The rain lashed against the windows, a relentless drumming as the townsfolk watched me, their eyes holding a promise of eternity. Heaven was a place where time stood still, a perfect illusion crafted from the hopes and fears of those who dared to enter. And I was bound to its dark heart, forever seeking escape from a paradise turned nightmare. The storm raged on, and with it the realization that the battle for my soul had only just begun. Aunt Lydia's warning echoed through my thoughts. Heaven is not what it seems. I vowed to survive, to unravel the mystery and ensure that her sacrifice, and perhaps my own, would not be in vain. But even as I plotted my escape, the lingering fear rooted itself deep within, a shadow that whispered of the inevitability of heaven's eternal embrace. The town watched and waited, a spectral specter in the guise of paradise, its secrets weaving a tapestry of horror that held me captive. In the depths of the night, as the storm finally abated, I felt the weight of countless eyes upon me, an unending vigil that would not cease until heaven claimed what it believed was rightfully its own. The battle was far from over, and though fear threatened to consume me, a flicker of hope remained, a hope that one day I might walk free from the shadows of heaven, leaving the town and its dark legacy behind. There is a unique stillness that settles into the crevices of a home in the early hours of the morning. It cloaks the familiar with shadows, turning the mundane into something more sinister under the dim glow of streetlights filtered through heavy curtains. The house I had rented a room in was no different. It was an old Victorian, sitting quietly in a row of similar structures, each with its own story pressed into the brickwork by the weight of time. My landlady, Miss Walmsley, was an elderly woman of few words, her face a roadmap of wrinkles that seemed to trace the history of the house itself. I had moved into the attic room a month ago, seeking both the anonymity and charm of the city, with its cobblestone streets and narrow alleyways. The room was small but cozy, with slanted ceilings and a single window that opened up to the world outside, a cityscape that glittered like an ocean of stars. Miss Walmsley lived on the ground floor, her movements as silent and unassuming as a wisp of smoke. She was there, I knew, but in what capacity she existed beyond the locked door of her quarters was a mystery. The first few weeks passed with the quiet hum of normalcy. I attended a nearby university, my days filled with lectures and the comforting routine of academia. Evenings I spent in my room, buried beneath textbooks and notes, the tick of the clock the only sound punctuating the solitude. Wie bing weisethat, was dir said, mativ direng. Occasionally I would catch a glimpse of Miss Walmsley in the hallway, or hear her soft footsteps padding across the wooden floors below. There was a sense of peace to it all, a rhythm that soothed the soul. It was during one of those nights, as I sat with a mug of tea cooling by my side and notes spread across the desk, that I noticed it for the first time. A subtle change in the air. A disturbance, as slight as a whisper. The light bulb in my desk lamp flickered, casting momentary shadows that danced across the walls. I dismissed it as an electrical fault, a quirk of an old house. But then I heard it, a low murmur, as if someone was speaking just beyond the range of hearing. I strained to listen, but the sound slipped away, elusive as a dream upon waking. In the following days, the disturbances grew. The flickering light became a nightly occurrence. Objects seemed to shift ever so slightly, as if nudged by an invisible hand. My belongings, meticulously placed, would be subtly out of order when I returned from classes. I began to feel watched, a tingling awareness that prickled the back of my neck. It was unsettling, but the rational part of my mind clung to logical explanations. The house was old. It creaked and settled. It was bound to have its peculiarities, but logic failed me the night I found Miss Walmsley in the hallway, standing in the dim glow of a flickering bulb. Her eyes were distant, unfocused, and her hands trembled as they clutched the front of her nightgown. I called out to her, concern lacing my voice, but she did not respond. Instead, she turned slowly, her movements fluid yet mechanical, and disappeared into the shadows of the stairwell. I hesitated, an inexplicable chill rooting me to the spot, before following. But when I reached the bottom of the stairs, She was gone, the door to her quarters firmly shut. The incident lingered at the edges of my thoughts, a ghost that refused to be ignored. I found myself studying her more closely during our brief interactions, noting the pallor of her skin and the weariness in her eyes. Her presence in the house grew more ethereal with each passing day, as if she were fading into the very walls. There was something terribly wrong, and I could no longer deny it. The disturbances were not mere figments of imagination. They were real, and they were intensifying. It was a stormy night when things came to a head. Rain lashed against the window panes, the wind howling through the eaves like a chorus of lost souls. I was in bed, the covers drawn up to my chin, the shadows deeper and more oppressive than usual. Sleep was elusive, my mind refusing to quiet. The house was alive, creaking and groaning under the onslaught of the storm. And then I heard it again, the whisper, growing louder, more insistent, a voice calling from the depths of the shadows. The temperature dropped, the air heavy with an unnatural chill. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest, and saw it. A figure standing at the foot of my bed, indistinct and wrapped in darkness. I blinked, disbelief and terror struggling for dominance. The figure moved closer, the shadows peeling away to reveal Miss Walmsley. But it was not her. The eyes that met mine were empty, devoid of life, as if the soul had been hollowed out and replaced with something other. "Help me," she said, her voice a rasping echo that seemed to originate not from her throat, but from the very air around us. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the headboard, my mind a chaotic swirl of fear and confusion. She reached out, her hand passing through the space between us, and I felt a coldness seep into my bones, a lingering touch that left me breathless. And then she was gone, dissolving into the ether as if she had never been there at all. The rest of the night passed in a haze of terror and sleeplessness. When morning finally broke, weak and pale through the storm clouds, I knew I had to confront whatever haunted the house. Steeling myself, I descended the stairs, determined to speak with Miss Walmsley, to uncover the truth of what held her, and perhaps the house, captive. Her quarters were silent, the door ajar. I hesitated only for a moment before pushing it open, the hinges protesting with a creak that seemed to echo endlessly. The room inside was dark, the curtains drawn, and the air heavy with neglect. Miss Walmsley sat in an armchair by the window, her form as still as a statue, eyes fixed on something unseen. "Miss Walmsley," I ventured, my voice a timid intrusion into the oppressive silence. She did not respond, did not move, her gaze unwavering. I stepped closer, my heart a staccato beat in my chest. As I approached, I noticed the photographs scattered across the floor, sepia-toned images of a life once lived, smiling faces now faded with time. Among them, a young Miss Walmsley stood proudly in front of the house, her eyes bright with a joy I could scarcely reconcile with the shell of a person before me. The realization hit me with the force of a gale. This house wasn't just haunted, it was consuming her, piece by piece, memory by memory. The whispers, the disturbances, they were a cry for help, a plea from the remnants of a soul trapped within its confines. I reached out, my fingers brushing her hand, hoping to anchor her, to draw her back from the brink. Her skin was cold, unyielding, but as our hands touched, a flicker of awareness seemed to light her eyes. "Leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a breath of sound that tugged at the very edges of existence, "before it takes you too." The urgency in her voice broke through my fear, sparking a clarity I had not known before. I nodded, unable to speak, and backed away, the room closing in like the jaws of a beast. I fled the house, the door slamming shut behind me with a finality that left no room for doubt. Outside, the storm raged on, the wind whipping at my clothes as I stood on the pavement, breathless and shaking. The house loomed behind me, its windows dark and unyielding, a fortress of secrets and shadows. I turned away, seeking refuge in the bustling life of the city, the anonymity of the crowds. Days turned into weeks, the memory of that night a constant companion, a shadow that refused to be cast aside. I found another place to live, another room in another part of the city, but the sense of being watched lingered, an unwelcome guest that followed me from room to room. I never saw Miss Walmsley again, never returned to that house. But sometimes, on stormy nights when the wind howls like a chorus of the damned, I hear her voice in the rustle of leaves, a soft murmur that brushes against the boundaries of sleep. Help me, it says, a plea and a warning intertwined, never to be forgotten.
The house I grew up in was an old Victorian, perched at the end of a long, winding street in a small, unremarkable town. It was a maze of narrow hallways and creaky staircases, each room steeped in the kind of history that seeps into your bones. The wallpaper curled in the corners, and the floorboards whispered secrets as you walked. My earliest memories are rooted in that house, comforted by its familiar shadows and the muted warmth of afternoons spent in the company of my family. Life in our home was typical, predictable even. My parents were hardworking, devoted people. My sister Elle and I shared a close bond, despite our age difference. She was 5 years older, always the more sensible one, while I was the dreamer, often lost in my own world. Our days were filled with laughter, occasional sibling squabbles, and an ever-present sense of belonging. It was a safe haven, a refuge where each nook and cranny held the echoes of our shared lives. The first sign of something amiss came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. It was late fall, the kind of day where the light took on a golden hue, casting long shadows through the lace curtains. I was in the living room, lazily flipping through a book, when I heard a faint scratching noise. At first, I dismissed it as the wind or perhaps a squirrel scurrying along the roof. But then it came again, insistent and deliberate. I followed the sound, tracing it to the small cupboard under the stairs. It was a space we rarely used, a dark, cramped closet filled with forgotten boxes and the smell of old wood. As I opened the door, expecting perhaps a trapped rodent or a stray branch brushing against the house, I was met with silence. The sound had stopped, leaving only the soft sigh of the house around me. Shrugging it off as a figment of my imagination, I returned to my book. Yet, the sense of unease lingered, like an itch I couldn't quite scratch. Days passed without incident, but then the noise returned. This time, it was accompanied by a feeling, a presence that seemed to hover just out of sight, watching, waiting. I mentioned it to my parents, who dismissed it as nothing more than the house settling. Elle teased me, claiming I'd been reading too many ghost stories. But the disturbances continued. Items began to disappear, only to reappear in the oddest of places. A pair of my mother's earrings found in the garden, Elle's favorite scarf draped over a tree branch outside. Each time, we rationalized it away. The result of absent-mindedness, a fluke. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The real escalation began one evening when I was home alone. My parents had gone out for the night, and Elle was at a friend's house. I was in the kitchen, making a snack, when I heard a voice, soft, almost a whisper, calling my name. Maddie. It was playful, teasing, and undeniably coming from the direction of the staircase. Heart pounding, I crept towards the stairs, my every instinct screaming to run, to hide. But curiosity, or perhaps something darker, compelled me onward. As I reached the base of the staircase, the voice came again, sharper this time. Maddie, come play. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Slowly, I ascended the stairs, each creak beneath my feet echoing like a drumbeat in the stillness of the house. The voice led me to the room at the end of the hall, a room we never used, one that held only dust and forgotten memories. The door was ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me in. I hesitated, a chill running down my spine. Yet, I pushed the door open, half expecting to see a prank orchestrated by Elle or perhaps a trick of my mind. What I found was an empty room, save for a single chair placed in the center, facing the window. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy that prickled my skin. I turned to leave, but the door swung shut with a decisive click. Panic surged through me as I reached for the handle, only to find it locked. I was trapped. In the ensuing moments, I felt a presence unlike anything I had ever known. It was as if the shadows themselves had come alive, swirling around me, whispering my name in tones of mockery and malice. Maddie. Maddie. I stumbled back, my vision blurring, heart hammering in my chest. Desperate, I fumbled for my phone, the faint glow of beacon in the oppressive darkness. I dialed Elle's number with trembling fingers. When she answered, her voice was a balm to my frayed nerves. Maddie, what's wrong? I'm trapped, I stammered, the words spilling out in a rush. In the old room, the one at the end of the hall. There was a pause, then the sound of footsteps, a door slamming, and Elle's breathless assurance. Stay there. I'm coming. Time stretched and warped as I waited, the presence around me growing stronger, more insistent. It was a living thing, ancient and malevolent, feeding off my fear. I could feel its eyes on me, cold and calculating. Finally, the lock clicked, and the door swung open to reveal Elle, her face pale with worry. She pulled me into a tight embrace, the warmth of her presence dispelling the chill that had settled in my bones. What happened? She asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and concern. I shook my head, unable to articulate the terror that clung to me. I don't know. There's something here, Elle, something wrong. We left the room together, the sense of dread lingering like a shadow at our heels. That night, I slept fitfully, my dreams filled with echoes of the voice, taunting and relentless. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted. My parents noticed it too, though they tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. The odd occurrences continued, escalating in frequency and intensity. Lights flickered, doors slammed of their own accord, and the temperature dropped inexplicably, leaving frost patterns on the window panes. Elle and I spent hours researching the history of the house, poring over old records and local legends. We discovered that our home had a past shrouded in mystery, a family who lived there long ago, their lives marked by tragedy and loss. Rumors of strange happenings, unexplained disappearances. The more we learned, the more the pieces fell into place. The presence in the house was not a ghost, not in the traditional sense. It was something older, a hidden horror that had lain dormant, awakening now for reasons we couldn't comprehend. Desperate for answers, we reached out to a local historian, a woman named Mrs. Hawthorne. She met with us in the library, her eyes sharp and knowing. As we recounted our experiences, she listened intently, nodding as if she'd heard it all before. You must understand, she said, her voice calm yet grave. This house is a vessel for the past. It harbors emotions, memories, entities. What you've encountered is what some might call an unexpected monster. I shivered at her words, the term striking a chord deep within me. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Hawthorne considered us for a moment, then said, you must confront it. Acknowledge its presence, but do not succumb to its influence. It thrives on fear, on the energy you give it. With renewed determination, Elle and I returned home, the weight of Mrs. Hawthorne's advice heavy on our minds. That night, we faced the house together, our resolve a fragile barrier against the darkness that lurked within. We walked through the rooms, speaking aloud, acknowledging the presence that lingered in the corners. We know you're here, Elle called, her voice steady. We won't be afraid. As we spoke, the house seemed to come alive, the walls pulsing with an energy that radiated like heat. The shadows gathered, swirling around us, their whispers a cacophony of sound. But we stood firm, our hearts beating in unison, refusing to yield. Finally, the air grew still, the presence retreating like a tide pulled back from the shore. A sense of calm settled over the house, the oppressive weight lifting as if a window had been opened to let in fresh air. In the days that followed, the disturbances ceased. The house, once again, was quiet, its secrets buried beneath layers of time. Yet, the experience left a mark, a lingering fear that whispered at the edges of my consciousness. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is silent and sleep eludes me, I hear it, a soft voice, playful and teasing, calling my name. Maddie. It is a reminder, a warning, that the hidden horrors of the world are never truly gone, only waiting for the moment when the shadows grow long and the night stretches its fingers across the land.
The house sat on the corner of Maple and Elm, a picturesque embodiment of suburban dreams. It was a classic two-story colonial, dressed in a white coat of paint, capped with dark shutters, and surrounded by a perfectly manicured lawn. A white picket fence enclosed the property like a protective embrace. When we first stumbled upon it, my wife Clara and I were enchanted by its charm. It was the embodiment of everything we thought we wanted. A place to start a family, a haven away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The first few months in our new home were idyllic. We spent weekends tending to the garden, painting rooms and unpacking boxes. The neighborhood was friendly, a tapestry of families and retirees who waved warmly as they passed by. Our evenings were filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the comforting murmur of the television in the background. Life felt like a dream fulfilled, the kind of happiness you dared not question. It was on one of those serene evenings, as we sat on the patio sipping iced tea, that the first strange occurrence presented itself. Clara noticed it first, a faint sound, like a distant whisper, threading through the ambient noise of crickets and rustling leaves. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "Hear what?" I replied, setting my glass down, listening intently. "It sounded like someone whispering," she said, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the porch light's reach. We brushed it off as the wind, or perhaps a trick of the mind, and the evening resumed its tranquil course. But it wasn't long before the peculiarities began to multiply. A few days later, I was in the study sorting through paperwork when I heard it. A soft, unintelligible murmur. It seemed to emanate from within the walls, a distortion of language that sent a shiver down my spine. At first, I dismissed it as a draft or an echo, but the frequency increased, and with it, so did my unease. The whispers grew bolder, more coherent, though the words remained just out of reach, like a memory half remembered. Clara felt it too. She became restless, her disposition shifting from carefree to anxious. She'd pause mid-sentence, her eyes darting toward the walls as if expecting them to speak. We confided in each other, our conversations filled with rational explanations, perhaps the house settling, perhaps old pipes. Yet, these justifications rang hollow, unable to quell the growing sense of dread. The situation escalated one evening while we were preparing dinner. As Clara chopped vegetables, she suddenly dropped the knife, her hand flying to her mouth. Her eyes were wide, filled with a confusion that quickly turned to fear. "It's louder now," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I strained to listen, and sure enough, the walls seemed to pulse with an indistinct chatter, several voices overlapping, an ethereal congress of the unseen. It was no longer a faint background noise, but a presence, something we could not ignore. We began to search the house, room by room, tapping on walls, inspecting every corner, trying to find the source. We even called a contractor to look at the plumbing and check for any structural issues. Everything solid, he assured us, but his puzzled expression suggested otherwise. Then the writing appeared. It started as faint marks, almost like scratches, on the study's walls. We assumed it was the work of a previous owner, perhaps a child or an overzealous decorator, but as the days passed, the scratches evolved into more distinct patterns, symbols and letters that seemed to shift when we weren't looking directly at them. One morning, I awoke to find a new phrase scrawled across the wall beside our bed. "Open, and you shall hear." It was written in a crude, unfamiliar script, the letters jagged and uneven. Clara was unnerved. "What does it mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Does it mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I admitted, my own fear mirrored in her eyes. We scrubbed it clean, painting over it, but new messages soon took its place. They appeared in different rooms, each one more unsettling than the last. Questions, commands, a litany of fragmented thoughts. The ambiance of our once cherished home shifted dramatically. The warmth faded, replaced by an oppressive chill. Shadows seemed deeper, darker, crawling along the walls like living things. The whispers grew more insistent, a cacophony that ebbed and flowed, sometimes silent, sometimes rising to a crescendo that made sleep a distant memory. One evening, as I sat alone in the study, the whispers coalesced into discernible words. "Listen," they urged. "Listen and understand." I felt compelled, as if an invisible hand guided me toward the bookshelf. My fingers traced the spines until they landed on an old, leather-bound volume I hadn't remembered acquiring. It was a journal, its pages yellowed with age, filled with spidery handwriting. As I read, a story unfolded, a tale of the house's previous occupant, a reclusive scholar obsessed with the esoteric. His notes described rituals, invocations, and attempts to commune with unseen entities. He wrote of the walls as conduits, channels for communication with the beyond. Chilled, I closed the book, my heart pounding. Clara found me there, the journal clutched in my hands. I explained what I had discovered, the truth unraveling like an old, forgotten melody. "It has to be a hoax," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Yet, the more we tried to dismiss it, the more persistent the phenomenon became. The house seemed alive, its walls throbbing with an ancient, malevolent energy. The whispers were now accompanied by a low, rhythmic chant, a wordless song that seeped into our minds and dreams. Desperation drove us to seek help. We invited a medium, a woman renowned for her attunement to the supernatural. As she walked through the house, her expression shifted from curiosity to concern. In the living room, she paused, her hand raised as if to touch an invisible veil. "This place is not haunted in the traditional sense," she murmured, her eyes glazed. "It's a gateway, a nexus." Her words confirmed our deepest fears. The walls were not merely talking, they were a portal, a bridge between our world and another, one that harbored entities with unknown intentions. The medium advised us to leave, to abandon the house before it consumed us. But selling it proved impossible. Prospective buyers felt the unease, the invisible miasma that clung to the air. The sky was a tumult of black clouds and jagged lightning. The rain battered the house, each drop a tiny drumbeat heralding the chaos within. As we huddled together in the bedroom, the whispers rose to a terrifying symphony, the walls vibrating with a force that threatened to tear them apart. Open your mind, the voices demanded, and we shall reveal the truth. Terrified, we clung to each other, feeling the boundaries of reality dissolve as the rooms spun around us. The chant grew louder, a crescendo of otherworldly power. Just as it seemed the house would implode, everything stopped. Silence descended like a shroud, oppressive and complete. The whispers, the writing, the sensation of being watched, all vanished as if they'd never existed. Yet in that silence lay the horror of understanding. The house had shown us its power, and though it rested now, we knew it could awaken at any moment. We left the next day, abandoning our dream home to the malevolent forces within. The whispers still haunt my thoughts, an echo that lingers at the edge of perception, reminding me that some doors once opened can never truly be closed. When I lie awake at night, I hear it, the faintest hum, a memory of a voice, promising that the walls are always listening, always waiting for the next unwitting soul to hear their call. The rhythmic pulse of the dial tone was something I had grown accustomed to. Working as a telecom technician in the heart of the United States, my days were filled with the monotonous hum of old wires and the comforting click of rotary phones. The nostalgia that clung to these antiquated devices spoke to a time when communication was more deliberate, requiring patience and a steady hand to dial each number. It was a quiet job, one that allowed me to retreat into my thoughts while I worked, soldering connections and tightening screws. For a long time, this normalcy was all I knew, a soothing routine that wrapped around me like a favorite sweater. Then one afternoon, I received a call from an old client named Mr. Hargrove. He lived alone in a creaky Victorian house on the outskirts of town, a place brimming with history and stories that had long been forgotten. His voice on the line was tinged with unease, a stark contrast to his usual buoyant demeanor. He claimed that his phone line had been exhibiting strange behavior. Voices, he said, whispering something unintelligible, like they're just out of reach. I assured him that it was probably some interference or a neighbor's radio, promising to stop by the next day to take a look. The following morning, a thick fog clung to the ground as I made my way to Mr. Hargrove's house. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of wet earth and the distant promise of rain. His home loomed out of the mist, its windows reflecting the gray sky like old eyes weary with secrets. Mr. Hargrove greeted me at the door, his usual smile now a thin, concerned line. He led me to the study where the old phone sat on an ornate, dust-covered table. I began my inspection, checking the external wires and connections first. Everything seemed in order, a pristine network of copper lines that had withstood the test of time. Despite my reassurances, Mr. Hargrove insisted that I listen for myself. With a skeptical nod, I picked up the receiver, half expecting to hear nothing more than static. Instead, a soft murmur tickled my ear, indistinct and fleeting, like a conversation happening miles away. Curiosity piqued, I set to work. Hours slipped by as I pored over the wiring, tracing each line through the house and out to the junction box at the end of the street. The fog had thickened, swallowing the world in a blanket of white, and with it came an unnerving silence that seemed to amplify the whispering voices, now audible even without the phone. They were layered and fluid, an ever-changing chorus that defied understanding. A manna of perception, until the world was intimately. As I moved from room to room, the sound followed, permeating the walls and settling into every crevice. It was hypnotic, a gentle lullaby that tugged at the edges of my consciousness. I found myself straining to listen, desperate to catch any recognizable words or phrases, but they remained elusive, slipping through my grasp like water through fingers. The voices grew louder as I approached the basement door. Mr. Hargrove, who had been watching me with a mixture of hope and dread, hesitated as I reached for the handle. "I've never been down there," he admitted quietly. "It's been locked since I moved in, and the key was lost long ago." His confession was unsettling, yet the pull of the voices was stronger than any sense of caution. With a few tools from my kit, I managed to coax the door open, its hinges groaning in protest. The basement was an abyss of shadows, a space that seemed to exist outside of time. The air was cool and damp, carrying with it the scent of mildew and forgotten memories. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I noticed a series of old switchboards lining the far wall, relics of a bygone era. They were covered in dust, their lights long extinguished, yet the whispering voices resonated with a new intensity, as if the very walls were speaking. I approached the switchboards, drawn to their silent complexity. It was then that I realized the voices were emanating from the tangled web of wires that connected them. They sang a mournful song, an endless loop of sorrow and longing. My heart pounded in my chest, a visceral response to the inexplicable phenomenon unfolding before me. I spent hours in that oppressive space, examining the switchboards with meticulous care. Despite their age, there was no logical explanation for the voices. The wires were dead, disconnected from any power source. Yet the murmurs persisted, a ceaseless tide that ebbed and flowed in a language I could not comprehend. The sound was maddening, a haunting melody that refused to be silenced. It clung to me as I returned to the upper floors, a spectral presence that blurred the line between reality and imagination. Mr. Hargrove watched my retreat with a mix of disappointment and relief, as if uncertain whether he wanted the mystery solved or left undisturbed. Days turned into weeks, and still the voices haunted me. They seeped into my dreams, a persistent echo that refused to fade. I found myself returning to Mr. Hargrove's house, drawn by a compulsion I could not resist. Each visit revealed nothing new, yet the act of listening became a ritual, a communion with the unseen. As the investigation continued, I began to notice other changes. Electronic devices in my own home started acting peculiarly. My radio would occasionally pick up strange frequencies, and the television flickered with static images that melted into one another, forming ghostly silhouettes. Even my own phone, a modern device, began to emit the same eerie whispers. The escalation of these occurrences left me unsettled, a growing fear gnawing at the edges of my mind. I delved into research, scouring old records and forgotten archives. I learned that Mr. Hargrove's house had once served as a central switching hub for the town's first telephone exchange. The basement, with its antiquated switchboards, was a remnant of that era, a forgotten piece of history left to gather dust. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the voices were not merely a figment of my imagination. They were a part of something larger, a tapestry of forgotten lives woven into the fabric of the house itself. Yet no matter how much evidence I gathered, the core of the mystery eluded me, a puzzle with missing pieces forever out of reach. The climax came one evening as I sat in the basement surrounded by the quiet hum of the switchboards. The whispers crescendoed into a cacophony, a swirling vortex of sound that threatened to overwhelm my senses. Desperation clawed at me as I tried to make sense of the chaos, to unravel the intricate web of voices that had ensnared my mind. In that moment, something shifted. The air grew electric, crackling with an unseen energy that danced along my skin. The switchboards, dormant for decades, flickered to life, their lights glowing dimly in the darkness. I watched in stunned disbelief as the voices coalesced into a single coherent message, a plea for help that resonated with a profound sense of loss and yearning. It was a moment of clarity, a brief glimpse into the souls trapped within the wires. their stories woven into the very essence of the house. I felt their anguish, their desperate need to be heard and remembered. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the moment passed, the lights dimmed, the voices faded, and silence reclaimed the basement. The lingering fear remained, a shadow that followed me long after I left Mr. Hargrove's house for the final time. I carried the weight of their stories with me, an unshakable reminder of the unseen world that exists just beyond our perception. The whispers still echo in my mind, a haunting lullaby that lingers in the quiet moments, a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. There are moments in our lives when the extraordinary gently brushes up against the mundane, often leaving just a whisper of its presence. For me, it began in Mosul, amidst the dusty, sun-beaten streets that seemed to echo with the weight of ancient secrets. As a freelance journalist, I had ventured there in search of stories that might capture the essence of resilience amidst turmoil. I found myself drawn to the whispered tales of the locals, stories about a mysterious signal that some claimed could penetrate the veil between the living and the dead. The signal was said to emanate from an old military radio, abandoned in the aftermath of conflict. It was rumored to have been used during the height of battles, but now lay dormant, except for the occasional burst of static that some claimed carried voices from beyond. Intrigued, I set out to find this fabled radio, hoping to uncover a story that would resonate with the world. The radio was housed in a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, its presence marked only by the faded remnants of a once regal military insignia. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and forgotten memories, and the silence was punctuated only by the occasional chirp of a bird, daring enough to break the stillness. The radio itself was a relic, its dials tarnished, its once shiny surfaces dulled by time and neglect. Yet, there was an aura about it that seemed to hum with potential energy, as if waiting for the right moment to awaken. As I adjusted the dials, a sense of anticipation tingled in the back of my mind. The static crackled to life, a sound both familiar and unsettling. I leaned in closer, straining to catch any discernible words amidst the mechanical hisses and pops. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint melody, a tune that seemed oddly comforting despite its eerie context. But then it was gone, swallowed by the static. I spent several hours there, trying various frequencies, documenting my findings, yet the signal remained elusive. Just as I was about to give up, a local man entered the building, his face lined with years of hardship, yet his eyes sparkled with unyielding spirit. "You're looking for the voices, yes?" he asked in broken English, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Only some can hear. Those who have lost, those who are open," he explained, pointing to his heart. With a look of understanding, he guided me through a series of seemingly random adjustments on the radio until, to my astonishment, a clear voice emerged. It was soft, almost as if it were coming from a great distance. "It's always the same voice," he murmured, a note of reverence in his voice. "A young woman, speaking in a language I don't understand." The voice was hauntingly beautiful, and though I couldn't decipher the words, a chill ran down my spine as she spoke. There was something achingly familiar about the cadence, as if I'd heard it before in a dream or a memory long forgotten. After returning to my small American town, the memory of the radio and its spectral voice lingered with me, weaving its way into my thoughts and dreams. I found myself captivated by the idea that there might be more to our world than meets the eye. that perhaps the veil between life and death was thinner than I had ever imagined. The town was a stark contrast to the bustling streets of Mosul, with its quiet roads lined by towering oaks and the gentle hum of cicadas filling the evening air. Yet, the comfort of familiarity was shadowed by an inexplicable sense of emptiness, as if something essential was missing. Driven by a compulsion I couldn't quite understand, I acquired an old radio from a local estate sale. It was a vintage piece with knobs and dials reminiscent of the one I had encountered in Mosul. I placed it in my study, a room awash with the soft glow of lamplight, and began my ritual of searching for the signal. The signal. Nights were spent hunched over the radio, ears attuned to its whispers. My fingers danced over the dials, adjusting frequencies with a precision born of desperation. The static was a constant companion, its voice a harsh reminder of my growing obsession. Friends called, concerned about my reclusive behavior, but I assured them it was merely the demands of my work keeping me occupied. One evening, as the last hues of twilight surrendered to darkness, the static gave way to a familiar melody. It was the same haunting tune I had heard in Mosul, weaving its way through the air with an ethereal grace. I closed my eyes, letting the music envelop me, and there it was, the voice. The young woman spoke in that same unknown language, her words fluid and entrancing. For reasons I couldn't comprehend, tears welled up in my eyes. It was as if she were speaking directly to my soul, unlocking emotions and memories I had buried deep within. Over the weeks that followed, the voice became a constant presence in my life. I recorded each session, hoping to decode the language or at least understand the message she was trying to convey. My dreams were filled with images of unfamiliar places, strange yet comforting in their familiarity. I saw flashes of a life I couldn't recall living, a series of disconnected moments that left me yearning for answers. It was during one of these sessions, the moon casting its pale glow into my study, that the voice grew more urgent. The words, always incomprehensible, now carried a weight of urgency that thrummed in my veins. My heart raced in response, the air thick with an unnameable tension. Suddenly, the radio emitted a burst of static so loud it forced me to recoil. As the noise subsided, I thought I heard a second voice. A man's voice labored beneath the woman's. The tone was deeper, filled with a sorrow that resonated with my own unspoken grief. I clung to the hope that this new development might bring clarity, but the escalation only deepened the mystery. The man's voice echoed through my mind, his words mingling with hers in a haunting duet that defied explanation. My nights were restless, filled with dreams that bled into reality, leaving me disoriented and exhausted. It was as if the signal was calling me to somewhere, to someone. I felt a pull I couldn't resist, a compulsion to discover the source of these voices, to understand why they had chosen me. I dug into town records, old newspapers, anything that might hold a clue. My search was relentless, driven by an instinctive need to bridge the chasm between the living and the departed. The climax of my obsession came on a stormy night. The wind howling through the trees outside like a chorus of lost souls. The trees were creaking on the night, the wind howling through the trees outside like a chorus of lost souls. I sat before the radio, fingers trembling as I adjusted the dials. The air was electric, crackling with anticipation. The static gave way with a clarity I'd never experienced before. The voices were there, louder than ever, their words interwoven in a symphony of sorrow and longing. I pressed the recorder close, determined to capture every nuance. In that moment, the world seemed to fall away. I was no longer in my study, but somewhere else entirely, a place where the boundaries of time and space were blurred. The voices enveloped me, and before I knew it, I was speaking their words, my voice blending with theirs in a harmony that transcended language. Tears streamed down my face as I spoke, my heart breaking with the weight of loss, yet buoyed by an inexplicable joy. I felt connected to something far greater than myself, a tapestry of lives and stories woven across time. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The voices faded, leaving a profound silence in their wake. I sat there, breathless and trembling, the enormity of what I had experienced settling over me like a shroud. In the days that followed, I replayed the recordings, hoping to glean some insight into their meaning. But the voices were no longer discernible, reduced to mere whispers beneath a blanket of static. It was as if the connection had been severed, leaving only echoes of what once was. Yet, the memory of that night lingers with me still, a reminder of the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. I am haunted by the voices, by the sense of connection that transcended the boundaries of life and death. Though I may never fully understand their message, I carry it with me, a silent testament to the mysteries that await us beyond the veil. And so, I continue to listen, the radio by my side, each burst of static a reminder of the extraordinary that exists just beyond our reach. The voices may yet return, and when they do, I will be ready to embrace the unknown, to welcome the whispers that dance on the edge of silence.